All right. First key point is we're the leading independent ERP consulting organization in Europe. Okay, so what does independent mean? Independent means that we don't sell software. Okay, what we do is we work with companies who are going to implement ERP software on their side of the implementation equation. So we work alongside people like SAP and Infor who are here and Microsoft and so on all the time, but we're working for people like you. Okay, and I'll explain what we do in a little bit more detail in just a moment. I said we're the leading consulting organization in Europe. It's a big claim, but we've done well over 100 projects, ERP projects, since 1997. And as you'll see, our coverage in terms of where we work and who we work with is quite extensive. In terms of who we work with, okay, we tend to work primarily with manufacturing, distribution and service organizations in the sectors that I've indicated there. We have some clients that are not in those sectors. Okay, so everybody does, and you'll see some of those on our client, on a sample client list very soon. But the bulk of our clients are people who, a lot of them are people who move or make things, so they're manufacturers or distributors or both. Or they're service people who do retail, or they deliver services of one sort or another. In terms of scale, majority of our clients are 50 million euro turnover up to 750 million. It's a broad range. We tend not to work very often with companies much smaller than that, although we occasionally do, and not very often with companies much bigger than that, although again we occasionally do. And final key point, just in terms of scale of us and where we're located. So we've got 25 permanent staff. Our HQ is in Galway, in the west of Ireland, for those that may not know where that is. We've got an office in London and another one in Maryland in the US. So just to talk about, I said that we do independent services on the client side of the ERP equation. So what does that actually mean? So we explain it like this. Let me explain this life cycle picture first of all, and then I'll explain where we support that life cycle. So the diagram represents the life cycle that organizations go through with ERP. So imagine, if you will, you're an organization, and maybe there's some in the room that have never done ERP before. We would say you're at 12 o'clock on that diagram. And typically what happens is organizations go through a period which we call planning, where they're saying, okay, we've grown, or things have changed in the business, or we feel that now we haven't had ERP, but we need ERP. We think we need ERP, but we don't know how much it would cost. We don't know what the scope of it should be. We don't know really should we be doing it at all at this time. That's the planning piece of the cycle. Eventually, people get to the end of that piece and they say, well, actually, we're convinced that we do need an ERP. So the next piece of the cycle is you've got to find which one. And events like today are useful to see who's in the market and see comparatively what the different products can do. Once you've selected the product, there's then what we call the deploy phase. So deploy means you've selected the product, you've selected the supplier, but now you've got to get it implemented. Okay? And then you get to the maintain phase. So in actual time, maintain as a phase might last 10 years, it might last longer. Right? The first three quadrants might last 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on what size you are. Okay? So maintain is going to be the longest period that you are involved in the life cycle. Now, so that's, if you imagine a simple way of describing what happens with ERP. And for many organizations, they go through this cycle many times. So the example I've just given, we started from no ERP to having an ERP. Maybe after 10 years, for various reasons, it's a long time in business, we need to change again. Or longer sometimes, 15, even 20 years. And you go around the cycle again. What BSM do is we support different stages of that cycle. So at the plan stage, we support that by developing what we call ERP strategy with people. So that's all about answering some of those questions that I mentioned. So the most fundamental one, do you need ERP at all? Maybe you don't. It's not always the right answer that you need ERP at a certain point. Or if you have ERP already, maybe the ERP you have is actually okay. You don't really need to change. But if you do, how much is it going to cost? And how much resource is it going to take from your point of view? And what should the scope of that be? And how many resources will you need to do it? And what will the benefits be? And so on. All these types of questions. That's what we work on with our clients at that point in the cycle. Next stage in the cycle, let's assume that it keeps going, because it's not always the case that it keeps going around the cycle. Sometimes we do the strategy projects, and the answer is not to procure, not to keep moving. It's to keep what you have. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it is. in terms, chronologically, the next thing that we would do with somebody is we work on defining what the tangible and intangible benefits of ERP are going to be. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit of detail in a few minutes. And help to develop the business case that's going to sell the project and launch the project within the organization. The next phase is the selection. So you've now sold the business case, you've got the authorization to spend an amount of money, you need to find the supplier, you need to find the product. Okay? We help people to do that in a very structured way. We keep going around the cycle, excuse me, and we get to the point just prior to deploy. Sometimes our first engagement with clients is not at the strategy bit, and it's not at the selection bit. It's just before they start the implementation. And one of the things that we do, if we engage at that point, is we do a very structured, detailed risk assessment that says, well, okay, before you get into this in too much detail, let's take a cold, hard look at all of the factors. And I'm going to show you some of those factors in a moment that we look at. Then we get into deploy. So in the deploy piece, you're implementing the product. And when you begin the implementation project, you'll have one to many, usually many, ERP consultants from whichever supplier you've chosen will arrive into your company to implement the product. But on your side of that implementation, for every 1 day that those consultants do, your organization is going to have to do 2, 3, 4 days. People often don't understand that. So if it's a 250-day project, consulting day project, which wouldn't be an unusual project for a company of medium size, budget for 750 days of time in your business. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of people, it takes a lot of management. And you'll need a project manager to do that. If you've got a project manager to do that, great. If you don't, we fill that gap. Okay? We manage the project. In some cases, if there's a lot of organizational change, which there is sometimes in many projects, we manage that specifically. And occasionally, we manage the data migration in projects. If projects are very complex, particularly. Data migration is the process of taking data from old legacy systems and getting it into the new, which is a difficult, tedious process. Okay, so working around the cycle, we've now implemented the product, it's live, and you're into maintain. And if you've done everything right around the first 3 stages of the cycle, things are going to work well for a long time. But maybe a number of years into the process of using whatever system you selected, things have gone a little bit stale. Maybe you haven't upgraded a couple of times. Maybe some of the people that were there when you did the original implementation have moved on. It's a bit of a skills gap. Maybe spreadsheets are starting to grow again like mushrooms around the organization, and inefficiencies are happening. And when that happens, we can work with people to say, well, okay, let's look at what you're doing with your product. We're not looking at changing the product. You've invested in it. You're going to keep it for a long time to come. But how can we optimize it? How can we work with you and the supplier to get more value from it? And that's what the optimization piece is about. Okay, so that's what BSM as an organization does. I'm going to talk today about the success factors in a few moments around ERP as we see it and what happens around ERP project success. Just 2 last quick slides. Excuse me, just get a sip of water. So in terms of where we work, as you can see, the bulk of our projects are in Europe. And within Europe, the bulk of our projects are in Ireland, UK probably dominating for the last year or 2. But genuinely, we work where we need to work. So each of those dots represents a point in the globe where we've worked on ERP projects at different times. So we've been as far away as the Philippines over there on the right, and different places in the US, South Africa, and so on. Final slide, just to move on, just in terms of some of our clients. As I said, we've done well over 100 projects. This is not all of our clients by any means. But you can see there's a mixture of, I suppose, quite well-known brand names almost, very well-known companies, and probably some that are slightly less known. There's a lot of companies in there that are in the sectors that I indicated that we work in. There's a few that are outside of that. So we work with a broad range of people. Okay, so that's BSM.